$2,000 billion. 3 Arab nations. One man with a red tie and a handshake. And in just 72 hours, the entire balance of power in the Middle East shifted permanently. What if I told you that in the span of just 3 days and 2 nights, Donald J. Trump did what Washington's diplomats failed to achieve in 3 decades? What if the rise of China in the Arab world, a project backed by trillions, ports, pipelines, and propaganda, was shattered not by war, but by contracts? Before we dive into the commentary, please like and subscribe to Worldview today so you won't miss our unique takes on global current affairs. Let's be clear, this was no ordinary diplomatic visit. This was a blitzkrieg of influence, executed with the precision of a seasoned businessman and the blunt force of a geopolitical hammer. While Beijing had been busy laying tracks, building ports, and erecting cultural institutes, Trump simply walked into Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi, offered billions in arms, investment, and cloud computing, and left with grinning princes, clapping presidents, and signed deals that dwarfed a decade of Chinese effort. In Saudi Arabia alone, a staggering $600 billion in U.S. bound investment was pledged. Add to that $142 billion in arms deals. Yes, that's the biggest military sale in Boeing's history. In Qatar, $96 billion in aircraft agreements. And from the UAE, a jaw-dropping $1,400 billion investment commitment toward America's infrastructure, energy, and high-tech sectors. Altogether, $2,000 billion in Arab capital returning to American soil. And all Beijing got in return was a cold shoulder. This wasn't just about money. This was about strategic denial. Trump didn't just outbid China, erased its influence in the region. The Belt and Road Initiative derailed Chinese AI ambitions in the Gulf, blocked by American tech standards, cultural outreach programs, drowned out by standing ovations for Trump in Riyadh and Ankara. Even Zuriyayis, once firmly embedded in Beijing's anti-American front, welcomed Trump with open arms, posed for cameras, and expressed eagerness for U.S. investment in its oil fields. The symbolism was brutal. China spent decades preaching anti-U.S. narratives in Arab states, and yet it was Trump, not Xi, who got the photo op. And here's where it gets even more remarkable. While President Biden emphasized human rights and distanced himself from key Gulf allies, pausing weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, limiting engagement with the Crown Prince, and touting liberal democratic values, Trump took the opposite path. He reaffirmed the old pact: oil for security, trade for trust, and the Gulf responded in kind. By the time Trump boarded Air Force One to leave Qatar, the tectonic plates beneath the Middle East had already shifted. The Saudis weren't just clapping, they were repositioning. The Emiratis weren't just signing contracts, they were recalibrating their entire regional strategy. And the Syrians? They were defecting from Beijing's axis of resistance to Washington's new map of normalization. But this geopolitical earthquake didn't come from thin air. It was the culmination of a long brewing reaction to the Biden administration's hands-off approach, a vacuum that China eagerly tried to fill. Beijing's method was methodical: invest in infrastructure, build goodwill through Confucius Institutes, sign energy deals, and act as a neutral broker in conflicts like the Saudi-Iran split. They made serious inroads. China's trade with Saudi Arabia doubled from $50 billion in 2015 to over $100 billion in 2023. In the UAE, trade surged to $80 billion. Huawei rolled out 5G infrastructure. Chinese drones flew over Gulf skies. Ports like King Abdullah and Khalifa became hubs for Chinese logistics under the Belt and Road banner. In Syria, Chinese funds rebuilt bombed-out infrastructure while diplomats lobbied at the UN to lift sanctions. To be fair, it almost worked. Until Trump came back, because Donald Trump didn't bring sermons, brought leverage. He didn't criticize Arab government, she empowered them, and he didn't beg for alignment, made it lucrative. By tethering Arab investments to US-based cloud infrastructure through firms like Google, Oracle, and Data, Trump locked in not just billions in capital, but technological allegiance, AI development in the Gulf, only with American chips, American servers, and American regulatory standards. Huawei was effectively sidelined not through sanctions, but through competitive obsolescence. Even more disruptive was the political signaling. Trump openly encouraged Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. That single suggestion sent tremors through Tehran, Beijing, and even Brussels. Because if Saudi Arabia, the spiritual leader of the Arab world, embraces normalization with Israel, the entire decades-old anti-Zionist narrative collapses, and with it, China's role as a symbolic defender of the Muslim world becomes irrelevant. Think about the irony. Beijing had long weaponized its anti-Western posture in Arab forums, presenting itself as the alternative to American hegemony. But in the space of 3 days, Trump stole that thunder not with ideology, but with infrastructure deals, not with speeches, but with results. And the most devastating blow, Syria, the country that had, for years, stood as a poster child for Chinese diplomatic defiance, receiving millions in aid, reconstruction funds, and UN lobbying support, publicly broke ranks. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad smiled, shook Trump's hand, and invited American companies to invest in Syrian oil. Beijing, stunned, offered no response. The Chinese Foreign Ministry didn't even issue a statement, and that silence, it was louder than any condemnation. Trump then dropped the ultimate bombshell, announcing that the United States would fully lift sanctions on Syria. No caveat, no lengthy conditions. Just a clean break from 2 decades of economic isolation. And in that moment, decades of Chinese positioning in Damascus collapsed like a house of cards. Let's pause here and make something clear. China didn't lose the Middle East because it lacked money. It lost because it forgot the power of leadership. While Beijing offered ports and promises, Trump offered partnership and prestige. And in the realm of prestige, nothing speaks louder than being the architect of peace. That's exactly what Trump positioned himself as, not just a deal maker, but a unifier of ancient enemies. By nudging Saudi Arabia toward the Abraham Accords, and even extending an invitation to Syria, Trump wasn't merely talking peace. He was redrawing the boundaries of Middle Eastern diplomacy with a thick black marker. To Beijing, this wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. For years, Chinese media had painted the U.S. as a fading empire, incapable of inspiring loyalty or brokering diplomacy. But here was Trump, not only pulling Gulf monarchies into America's orbit, but also flipping one of China's few strategic allies in the region. China had spent untold resources backing Assad diplomatically, reconstructing infrastructure, and shielding Syria from Western pressure at the UN. And then, in one photograph, Assad grinning next to Trump, that entire strategy unraveled. Even more damaging was how Trump turned these symbolic victories into institutional leverage. You see, these weren't just handshake deals. They were laced with conditions that excluded China by design. U.S. backed AI collaborations required compliance with American security standards, which conveniently barred Huawei and other Chinese tech Investment funds in infrastructure and cloud computing came with clauses about data sovereignty, again locking China out of the game. This wasn't policy. This was warfare, geoeconomic warfare. Beijing had long feared this moment. The nightmare scenario wasn't just tariffs or sanctions. It was the United States forming a web of trade and investment agreements that embedded systemic exclusions of China. And now, that fear is materializing first in the Middle East, and soon, potentially, across the world. Already, the United Kingdom's new trade framework with the U.S. includes provisions that force London to align with American supply chain standards explicitly designed to limit Chinese involvement in steel, auto manufacturing, and semiconductors. It's not a coincidence. These are what Chinese strategists call poison pill clauses conditions, so sweeping that compliance with them automatically sidelines Chinese companies. And if more nations sign similar deals, Beijing won't just face a U.S. tariff wall, it'll face global institutional quarantine. Trump's maneuvering hints at exactly that. By locking in high-tech cooperation with Gulf monarchies and tying it to U.S.-centric ecosystems, he's doing what no U.S. president dared before, weaponizing trust as the new currency of power. It's no longer about who offers the most cash. It's about who sets the rules. And right now, America is writing those rules again, one bilateral agreement at a time. Let's not forget, this isn't just a Middle East story. This is the prototype for a new order where trade isn't free, but filtered, where influence isn't claimed, but contracted, and where China's Belt and Road dreams face not a military response, but a market-led containment. And this containment doesn't look like Cold War brinkmanship. It looks like a contract printed on American letterhead, with clauses so precise they choke Chinese leverage out of entire sectors. What Trump has initiated isn't just a pushback, it's a surgical realignment of the global economy. And make no mistake, China knows it. That's why Beijing's reaction to Trump's Middle East tour was so telling. No condemnation, no counteroffers, no fiery editorials from state media, just silence. A silence that echoed through Zhongnanhai like the sound of an investment empire quietly imploding. But let's rewind. How did we even get here? For over a decade, China played the long game in the Middle East. It offered infrastructure without political conditions. It built ports, power stations, and pipelines. It pitched itself as the anti-America. No lectures on democracy, no entanglements in sectarian politics, and in many places, that strategy paid off. China became Saudi Arabia's top trading partner. It signed strategic pacts with the UAE. It acted as the go-between in the Iran-Saudi detente. But that strategy had one fatal flaw. It assumed time was on China's side. What Trump proved is that time can collapse in a weekend if you have the leverage, because while China brought ports, Trump brought planes. While Beijing offered loans, Trump offered access to markets, to technology, to legitimacy on the global stage. In Riyadh, he wasn't selling weapons, he was selling a future where Arab nations could lead, not follow. In Abu Dhabi, he wasn't peddling ideology. He was delivering infrastructure and AI partnerships that promised to make the Gulf indispensable in a post-oil world. And the Saudis and Emiratis didn't just buy it, they celebrated it. Meanwhile, back in Beijing, officials who had spent years cultivating these relationships watched as billions in soft power melted away under the desert sun. The Belt and Road, once hailed as the blueprint of a Chinese century, suddenly looked like a sandcastle against the tide. What's worse, these Arab nations didn't just pivot, they defected. Defection is different than drift. Drift is satellites, when allies slowly distance themselves without burning bridges. Defection is loud. It's when they take photos with your rival, sign deals that exclude you, and repeat your propaganda licenselessly in reverse. Like Syria, Assad didn't just accept Trump's hand. He invited American firms into Syrian oil fields territory. Beijing had long hoped to dominate post-reconstruction. He didn't just meet Trump, smiled for the camera, undercutting a decade of Chinese narrative, framing Syria as a proud bulwark against U.S. imperialism. To Beijing, this was betrayal. To Washington, it was victory. To the world, it was a message. Trump is back-end, so is America. In European capitals, policymakers are watching with a mix of awe and unease. Because if Trump can reset the geopolitical balance in the Arab world in 72 hours, what might he do in Brussels, Berlin, or Warsaw with just one summit? And more importantly, what terms will he demand? In London, the answer is already unfolding. The newly inked US-UK trade framework, celebrated as a post-Brexit win, carries with it echoes of the Trump doctrine. Not just market access, but strategic alignment. Britain gets reduced tariffs, but only if it complies with American rules on technology origin, supply chain integrity, and critical mineral sourcing. In short, decouple from China or forfeit the benefits. Now imagine this replicated across 5, 10, 20 more countries. This is not an agreement, it's a template. A template for a new world order built not on ideology, but economic conditionality. A world where trust in supply chains, digital standards, and investment flows is more valuable than ideology, and where China is being filtered out by design. That's what makes Trump's strategy so devastating. Unlike traditional containment military alliances, forward bases, and overt hostility, this is a stealth recalibration. Each trade pact is a valve. AI partnership, a gatekeeper. Digital infrastructure deal, a code lock. Together, they form a system where China isn't banned, it's simply incompatible. And in the Middle East, this model just proved its power. Take Saudi Arabia's new agreements in AI and cloud computing. The deals with Google, Oracle, and DataAv are more than infrastructure projects. They're gateways to standardized exclusion under U.S. cybersecurity frameworks. Saudi firms can't simultaneously use American cloud tools and Chinese systems. It's not a sanction, it's a choice, and the Saudis have made it even more symbolic. The participation of defense tech. Riyadh didn't just sign deals for F-15s, they signed licensing agreements for U.S. defense firms to co-develop next-gen systems in the kingdom. It means sensitive IP, weaponization algorithms, and combat AI, all flowing into the Arab world under the U.S. umbrella. And who's out? China. Entirely. Remember the Belt and Road's dream of connecting east to west via economic arteries? Trump just tied a tourniquet around it in the Middle East. And the aftershocks? They're starting to ripple. In Africa, where Chinese-built dams and highways were once met with applause, whispers are growing louder. Where's the sustainability? Where's the independence? Where's the respect? In Southeast Asia, where Beijing's gray zone tactics have unsettled the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, Trump's return signals that a counterbalance rooted in contracts, not carrier groups, is back on the table. And within China itself, the silence from Zhongnanhai says more than 1,000 Global Times op-eds ever could. Because when a nation loses influence, it invested decades and billions to build in just 3 days. What does it say about its true staying power? When your closest allies begin defecting with smiles and handshakes, what does it say about the durability of your promises? When the rules of the game are rewritten and you're not even at the table, you're still a global leader. Because here lies the real strategic twist: the battlefield has moved. This isn't about tanks, missiles, or aircraft carriers anymore. It's about infrastructure ownership, standards enforcement, and digital sovereignty. And Trump, more than any of his predecessors, understands that whoever writes the standards owns the future. Think about it. By turning Arab investment into pipelines for American cloud infrastructure, he's not just redirecting capital, he's rerouting compliance. Data generated in the Gulf will now pass through American protocols. AI systems developed under U.S. partnerships will follow American ethical frameworks. And cyber defense systems deployed by regional allies will be built incompatible with Chinese platforms. That's not cooperation. That's architectural dominance. In this new world, ports are less valuable than platforms. Oil fields matter. Yes, but algorithms decide their global relevance. And Trump, whether by strategic design or instinctive clarity, is building a world where China doesn't just lose contracts, it loses access. Let's talk about access. When Saudi Arabia signs a defense tech agreement that blocks Chinese tech from integrating with UARHAGRERAGR developed systems, it's more than a business choice. It's a digital divorce. When the UAE accepts conditions in its AI ventures that restrict Chinese chipsets, it's not just about speed or cost. It's about trust and who gets to define it. And here's the most profound realization. This isn't only hurting China economically, it's unraveling Beijing's narrative control. For over a decade, Chinese propaganda cultivated a powerful message in the global South Zone that portrayed the U.S. as arrogant, aggressive, and in decline, while presenting China as respectful, stable, and ascendant. It was a good story, until Trump gave the world a better one. A story of prosperity without lectures, of partnerships that deliver results, of contracts that bring instant infrastructure, high-tech cooperation, and investment returns, not vague promises, and long-term win-win slogans that rarely materialize. Arab leaders didn't just shift allegiance, they shifted faith. From a rising East to a reawakened West, and nowhere is that shift more poetic than in Syria. Here is a nation that China shielded diplomatically for years, that Beijing supported economically, strategically, and rhetorically, and yet, the moment sanctions were lifted by Trump, Assad stood beside him, smiling like a man reborn, and China left staring at the void it once filled. Even state-controlled Chinese commentators were unusually muted. No fiery op-eds, no televised indignation, just silence, as if they, too, knew the truth, that something irreversible had just happened. Because when your best efforts at soft power are upstaged by a 3-day tour, it's no longer just a loss. It's a referendum on your entire strategy, and if it were just a one-off, Beijing might have shrugged it off, chalked it up to Trump's charisma or timing. But it's not. It's a pattern, and it's spreading. The pattern where nations that once leaned east, tempted by non-interference, by cheap capital, by alternative institutions, are quietly turning west again. But this time, they're not doing it for ideology. They're doing it for integration. Because in this new order, Trump is shaping access to the U.S. market no longer comes free. It comes with strings that pull your supply chains away from China, your data out of Chinese clouds, your chips off Chinese boards. It's a slow, elegant suffocation of China's economic reach, not through war, through design. And what makes it so powerful is that it's voluntary. No one forced Saudi Arabia to drop Huawei. No one mandated Syria to welcome U.S. oil firms. No one required the UAE to limit Chinese military tech. They all chose it because the incentives were real, because the stakes were clear, because the future, at least as Trump painted it, looked American. And this brings us to the most unsettling truth of all for Beijing. Money alone isn't enough anymore. Because while China can fund ports, Trump offers partnerships. While Beijing can loan billions, Trump delivers recognition. And while China builds bridges, Trump builds architecture, legal, digital, military, and moral that nations want to be a part of. And in that architecture, there is no room for two rule makers. You either shape the system or you adapt to it. And in Trump's world, there's no mistaking who's holding the pen. Which leads us to a final question paradox. Really, if China, after all these years, all these loans, all these speeches, can lose a region like the Middle East in just 72 hours, what does that say about its hold on Africa, on Latin America, on Southeast Asia? More importantly, what does it say about its future? Because sometimes, it's not war that topples empires. It's a handshake, a contract, and a camera flash. If you value this perspective, consider subscribing to Worldview today and sharing it with someone who still believes in critical thinking